Hey guys, me and Bo have a message for you. And specifically, it's in regards to mother wounds. I want to dig into this subject a little bit more today. I wanted to share this information because I feel like this is going to help to close a lot of doors and possibly open a lot of doors as well for many of you. I just wanted to jump on here and speak on something that Spirit has really laid on my heart for the collective at this time. And I wrote down a few signs which will help you to determine whether or not this resonates with you or not. I'm going to speak on mother wounds. And I'll be honest with you, we live in a very narcissistic society. So it's very possible that one or both of your parents had some narcissistic traits that they weren't aware of. And unfortunately, these narcissistic traits, they do have repercussions. They can do some serious damage, is what I'm saying. Especially within the Black community, where mental health is not talked about very much. Narcissism has become very common. It's become a thing of the norm. And it generally shows up in things like beating your children for every little thing that they do, screaming at them, scolding them for little things. And many of us, we brushed it off as just having Black parents, even though we went to school with whips on our behinds, even though we went to school and went out into society with bruised egos after being yelled at, after being degraded. And so I do want to speak on this because many of us suffer from these mother wounds. There's also father wounds, but today I'm going to focus on mother wounds. This is coming up strong within the collective. And what I'm seeing right now is it's because of that bond, that umbilical cord. Now that's a whole nother video, but just understand it goes very deep. The connection between a child and their mother is spiritual as well as biological. So a few of the signs of a mother wound. Number one is fear of speaking up, fear of speaking your truth, the fear of being reprimanded, the fear of being abandoned, neglected, harshly reprimanded, or receiving retaliation for speaking your truth or living in your own authenticity. The second one is feeling like you are always doing something wrong or living in paranoia as though you might do something wrong and walking around with fear and anxiety of making mistakes out of the fear of being harshly reprimanded or out of the fear of being neglected or abandoned. The fear of self-expression leading to abandonment, exile, neglect, ridicule. Feeling as though you were not heard or seen. Always feeling misunderstood or feeling like people will think that you're crazy. Feeling as though people won't believe your truth. Being afraid of vulnerability, always feeling the need to be guarded, and feeling anxious due to unpredictability. Now, all of these things will typically affect your throat chakra. So you might also have trouble expressing your true emotions, your feelings, your needs, and even your grievances. So earlier, as I was making a video I started thinking about something. It was very random. And it was in regards to how we hear and receive information from people. So, for instance, you might watch a video, and let's just say that the person is very aggressive. Maybe they have a very harsh way of speaking. If you're a person that's very sensitive, then you could actually be triggered, even if what they're saying is positive, because the tone of our voice actually affects our emotions. It affects our frequency. Let's just say you go into a public building and the first thing you hear is screaming and loud voices. The first thing that you might think is that they're fighting. Even if you don't know what they're saying, they could actually just be playing. And this has happened sometimes, right? But based on the tone of their voice, you might assume that it's aggressive, that they're fighting. Because me, I'm personally a naturally sensitive person. I've always been that way. Okay, and some of you might be able to relate to that, but I'm a naturally sensitive person. I like to be calm. I like when people speak to me calm. I like to speak to other people calmly and with respect. And so when I'm approached by certain people who are very aggressive, I can sometimes get triggered. Even if they have good intentions, people communicate openly the way that they communicate with themselves. So you can tell a lot about the way a person talks to themselves by the way that they talk to other people. What if I told you that the way that you speak to other people is the way that you speak to yourself? What if I told you that the way that other people speak to you is the way that they speak to themselves? The collective that I'm speaking to right now, you've always been a little sensitive, maybe even hypersensitive to some people. You don't like loud noises. You don't like people screaming at you. You don't like people being overly aggressive. You don't like when authoritative figures abuse their power. You don't like when people are disrespectful. And although at times you might actually speak a little aggressively, you really don't like to. You just do it because you feel like that's the only way that people will listen to you, because that's what you've learned. In order for people to pay attention, you have to speak louder. You have to be firm. You have to come across authoritatively. But what I've learned is that the loudest person in the room is not always the smartest. And just because you speak loud or you speak aggressively does not make what you're saying more effective. It doesn't make you more right. It just makes you louder. And so what I'm learning is that a lot of the patterns, a lot of the behaviors that we repeat are learned. You see, many of us, the way that we speak to ourselves is the way that our parents used to speak to us. They were our first teachers. So naturally, if you grew up in a home where you had parents who spoke very softly, who were very emotional, intelligent, who didn't raise their voices, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to do the same. It's going to be a lot easier for you to imitate that behavior. But for those of us who grew up in households that were full of chaos and fighting and unpredictability and aggression, that's also a learned behavior that many of us typically inherit. And if you're not aware of it, you will become, like the commercial says, your parents. Before you know it, you're that mom or that dad now screaming at your children the way that your parents screamed at you, because that's what you learned as an authoritative behavior. You feel as though you have to scream in order to get your point across, in order to be heard. You feel as though you have to beat your children into submission in order for them to listen to you or for them to respect you. These are learned behaviors. And I realized, I said, I don't like, because remember, we're all reflections of one another. So this is really great. But I was like, I don't like when people yell at me. I don't like when people are overly aggressive. I feel like I'll ingest the same information, whether they're screaming at me or rather they're just having a calm conversation. But a lot of people feel as though, or they learned that they have to scream, that they have to be super aggressive. It is very masculine. And I'm not one of those women that thinks like that, right? But you have to really look at it and understand why you do things. And when you understand why you do things, you can stop making excuses. I'm not saying that you should suppress your emotions or your feelings, but what I'm saying is that you don't always have to scream to get your point across. You don't always have to be like super aggressive. In fact, I feel like we should be more nurturing, because isn't that more inviting? Isn't that more welcoming? And Spirit is pointing out that I am speaking primarily to my sisters, because it's within our households that we've learned this, because once again, it was passed down. Most of our parents and grandparents, that's all they knew. Cursing their children out, beating our behinds until we were sore. Sometimes even putting us down as though we didn't have emotions. I witnessed all of these things in my household. So much so till it became normalized. And it's just so strange that for years, I began to repeat the same behaviors. Even in relationships, there were times where I was just very aggressive for no reason. And now that I look back at things, I'm like, that was very damaging. And I had to apologize to those people energetically, because I realized the damage that you can do just based on how you speak to a person. Just based on how you speak to a person. Yes, we're all adults, but we still have emotions. You still have that inner child inside of you. Just because you get older doesn't mean that you get harder. Or at least you shouldn't have to. What if we lived in a world that actually preserved that innocence? What if we lived in a world where we preserve that innocence? What if we were in relationships where we could nurture that innocence, that sensitivity within each other? Where you don't have to feel guarded. You don't have to put on this act, put on this mask or this performance of being hard in order to protect yourself? What if you felt safe just being soft? And yes, it means vulnerability, but what if it was safe to be vulnerable? I don't know about you, but I'm hanging up that hat of over aggression. And it starts with yourself, because the way that you communicate with yourself is how you're going to communicate with other people. So you have to first start changing the way that you speak to yourself in your mind. Are you putting yourself down? Are you being super aggressive? Like, get your stuff together, girl. Or are you having compassion? Are you showing yourself compassion? Are you speaking to yourself kindly? Because I realized that I was literally hearing my mother's voice. It's so crazy. And it was so ingrained in my mind that I actually took it on as my own. I thought it was mine. Until I had it reflected back to me through somebody else. And I was like, I don't like when people talk to me like that. But yet I talk to myself like that sometimes. And then so you ask yourself, where is that coming from if I don't even like that? Then why am I being like that with myself? And then now this is also how I'm coming off to the rest of the world, because I'm repeating the way that I speak to myself. So you can learn a lot about people just by having a conversation with them. Just by listening to the way that they talk to you. It will let you know how they talk to themselves. The way that people treat you is how they treat themselves. But sometimes you need that mirror reflection to see what it looks like. And I've also had those mirror reflections of those women who are mothering and who are nurturing and who are soft and who take their time. And it's just so inviting. It's so welcoming. It's so safe. You can have boundaries. You can be stern and not be loud or belligerent. It's possible to get your point across without making a fool of yourself, without being emotionally unstable. As a goddess, it's safe for us to take up space. But what I'm saying is that you don't necessarily need to be the loudest in the room. You don't have to be over aggressive. You don't need to try to be like a man. I know that we were taught that this is a man's world, that they're dominating the airwaves and that they're dominating the corporate world and all of these other things. And so you've had a lot of women who took on these personas in order to compete with the men. But I'm saying you don't need to do that. There is power in your femininity. There's power in your softness. Because while you being loud and boisterous might get people's attention, being soft and stern can create a more harmonious environment, can maintain more peace in your life, could employ more diplomacy. But you see, the tone of your voice It sends off signals. It sends off frequencies. And so when you're being loud and aggressive, it's almost like fighting words. Even if what you're saying you mean well. But like they say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. There is truth to that. Before you start fighting for the harsh way that you've been speaking to yourself, for all of that aggression, I want you to really look at where it's coming from. When did it start? Because 9 times out of 10, you weren't speaking to yourself that way as a child. Somewhere along the line, you learned this behavior. Someone taught you that this is what an adult looks like. This is how an adult talks. This is how an adult acts. We learn these silly things and then we start performing. And we forget who we truly are, which was that child that you've now locked away in a closet to put on this mask of what you think is necessary in order for you to survive in this world, in order for you to get your point across, in order for you to be heard or seen. So many people have become so good at performing. I'm speaking to the sensitive souls right now. Those who yearn to operate in softness, to operate in their sensitivity. And I understand it hasn't always been safe, because even as children growing up in a household with narcissistic parents, it didn't feel safe for you to be soft. You always had to have your guards up. When you were in those relationships with narcissistic people, it didn't feel safe for you to be sensitive or to wear your heart in your sleeves, for you to operate out of emotions because they took advantage of them. Some of them even ridiculed you. So it wasn't safe. But this is why Spirit is saying it's very important that you surround yourself with people who make you feel safe. Safe to be soft. Safe to be sensitive. Safe to be you. And the reason that sometimes you actually speak harsh to yourself or even to other people, because even though I'm a very sensitive person, sometimes I might come across very aggressive when I speak, because I'm very passionate about the things that I say, but I'm also mindful because of how I am and how I receive information. I know that even though I might have the best intentions, the way that I speak could determine whether or not people listen. The way that I speak to myself a lot of times, when it's very aggressive, because I've learned now to speak to myself nicer, to speak to myself more calmly and with more grace. But I realized the reason that I used to speak to myself like so aggressively was because I was literally still hearing my mother's voice. And my mother was very harsh with us. She was always reprimanding us. She was always screaming, telling us to get out of her face and, that type of vibe. And she was even aggressive with the men that she was with. Not to say that they weren't aggressive with her, but that was just the dynamic. Very masculine. Very domineering. And so I actually learned certain behaviors from her, whereas I even felt that I needed to replicate that. Because for me, I interpret it as, okay, this is how you speak when you're in authority. And so I felt in order for me to get respect that I had to speak with that same authority, with that same aggression, which is not true. Because it was also very damaging. I was a very sensitive child. And I'm still pretty sensitive. And I realized I don't want to be overly aggressive. Yes, I want to get my point across, but I don't need to be aggressive. I don't need to be loud. I don't need to scream. You can be soft and still be effective. So I just wanted to briefly touch on a few of the things that I mentioned in that list. The first one being fear of speaking up or speaking your truth. This often comes from you being silenced as a child. You were told to stay in a child's place. Or maybe when you did try to speak to your parents about certain things, you were ignored. They didn't have time for you. They found more important things to do, so you felt as though what you had to say wasn't important. So more and more you began to suppress how you felt because you didn't think that it mattered anyway. I'm here to tell you that your perspective matters. Your point of view matters. Your feelings and your emotions, they matter. Your self-expression matters. And another thing in regards to that is many of you have also felt misunderstood, which was another thing on the list. You might feel misunderstood at times because, once again, when you were a child, there were certain things that you spoke on and you were treated as though you were crazy. Actually, I'll take it a step further. I'll share a quick little tidbit from my life. I told my mother something that was very near and dear to me. Something that was happening to me as a child. And after I confided in her, she acted as though it never happened. So even though I spoke my truth, she invalidated it by not really acknowledging it, by treating me as though it was made up. I was abused. And instead of her taking the necessary precautions, taking legal action against that person, she brushed it under the rug. It was business as usual. In fact, she didn't even remove the person from our lives. I was still forced to be around them. And so for a long time, it was as though it never happened. I actually started to feel crazy. Of course I didn't make it up. But that happened. Literally. It was crazy. I wasn't crazy. That was crazy. And for a long time, I would try to over-explain myself because I didn't feel as though people believed me. And this also manifested as me not feeling understood. So I felt for a long time as though I wasn't understood, as though people wouldn't believe me. Why would they? I had told my mother one of the most important things in my life, and she acted as though she didn't believe me. And so that affected me for a long time. And I also spoke on being afraid of speaking your truth out of fear that you'll be abandoned and neglected. Well, many of us, especially if you were raised in a Black household, I'm pretty sure you heard that term, stay in a child's place. And don't even try to talk back because you would get slapped in the face, right? You already knew what was coming after that. So it was their way or the highway, which was very emotionally manipulative. One thing that I've learned over time is that we all have a voice. I don't care what race or what color you are. You should be the first one to give your children a voice. Even if you don't always like what they are saying, give them a voice. Because you silencing them is you teaching them that the world has the right to silence them. So it's important that you allow them to speak their truth. If they ask you why you're doing something or why you're punishing them for something, answer the question. It's a simple conversation. This is where you have a lot of people that abuse their authority. Children are curious, so naturally they're going to want to know why. It's not to offend you or to disrespect you. But once again, these are learned behaviors. So because your mother got angry when you asked her why, now you're projecting that onto your children. Because you were taught by your mother or your grandmother that that was disrespectful. You get to decide what is disrespectful. And speaking of emotional manipulation, I just wanted to use a quick example. I'll never forget this. And it used to be funny to me until I realized like how messed up it was. But I remember when me and my sister, I want to say I was probably 9 or 10, around that age. And we would get really bad whippings. At that time, my mother would just whip us for breathing, right? And so I remember we got this really bad whipping. And so me and my sister, we threatened to call the cops. We threatened my mom. And we were like, we're going to call the cops on you because we had whips in our butt and all kind of stuff. You know, we were sick and tired of it. And so we're like, we're calling the cops. Well, my mom's response was threatening to take us to a foster home. Threatening to give us up for adoption. So naturally we, changed our story real quick. We're like, no, it's okay. But that's how she emotionally manipulated us. She was like, well, would you prefer to go to a foster home with people that you don't know? Or would you prefer to be whipped? And we chose the whippings. But how messed up is that? Like, what type of option is that? And for years, I thought it was funny. Until I realized it was abuse. We don't call it that in the Black community, but it's abuse. Ask your ancestors who were getting beaten with whips. Maybe you don't have lashes down your back, but many of us had whelps on our butts. You're still breaking skin. Using belts and all of these other things. Is one thing if you want to just do a little spanking or something like that. But I don't think that you should be hitting another human being at all. Think about that. You don't want another person hitting them, but yet you're hitting them. When we get older, we call it domestic abuse. Let's talk about it. When we get older, as a woman, when a man hits us and it hurts, that's called domestic abuse. Same goes for a man. A woman strikes you, it causes you pain, that's considered domestic abuse. But yet, you beat your children. You beat your children. And you wonder why there is a law for child abuse. Make it make sense. You're telling those same children, don't let anybody hit you when they go to school. Don't let anybody hit you when they get in a relationship. Don't let anybody hit you. But yet your parents, the ones that brought you into this world, are beating you. Make it make sense. And so many of you, you wonder why you're afraid of authority. You wonder why you're having a nervous breakdown when your boss calls you in the office. When you're approached by authority figures, because the first authority figure that you ever came in contact with abused their power. And so now there is an unpredictability when it comes to authority figures. You don't know if they're on your side or if they're against you because of what you dealt with at home. You learn that they have the ability to abuse their power the same way they abused you. And many of you, as I spoke about, deal with anxiety and paranoia when it comes to relationships, when it comes to jobs. You're always worried about messing up because you're worried about the repercussions of being abused or abandoned or neglected. Because once again, the way that you were treated as a child, you were taught that you couldn't make mistakes. Or you were taught that if you made a mistake, that you would be very harshly scorned or reprimanded. So you were afraid to make mistakes in relationships, on jobs. You always felt like you were walking on eggshells. Because once again, you learn that the person closest to you, the person that brought you into this world, was capable of hurting you, of beating you, of neglecting you, of abusing you. And so now you look at other people in the same manner when you're in intimate relationships. You see them almost as that authority figure with the ability to abuse you, to hurt you, to neglect you. So you're always performing. You're always walking on eggshells. You probably don't express yourself authentically because you're afraid that If you express yourself authentically, they're going to leave you, or they're going to punish you. They're going to try to silence you. Because you had to deal with that unpredictability in your own household growing up as a child. And that unpredictability will leave anyone walking on eggshells. You never know what's going to happen. So you play it safe. You go through life suppressing your feelings, not speaking your truth, not voicing your views or your opinions, because you were taught that it wasn't safe. This all comes back to feeling safe. Feeling safe to just be you. To be soft, to be vulnerable, to be sensitive, to cry. Many of you were taught not to cry. I experienced that. You get a whipping and then your parent tells you, stop crying before I whip you again. Like, what? Like, you just beat the daylights out of me and now you don't want me to cry? It's like, what, am I, a robot? But this has happened to so many of us. This is like a thing of the norm within the Black community. And people just continue to overlook it as though it's not abuse. I'm going to call it what it is. It's abuse. And that's why I chose not to beat my child. Because I saw it for what it was. I wasn't just going to perpetuate the same behavior because it was passed down, or because I saw my mother do it and my grandmother do it. They didn't know better. But once you know better, you can do better. Who's protecting the children, if not the parents? Who's protecting the children? Who's giving them a voice, if not the parents? It's so important for you to be mindful of these things as a parent. And also, if you've been susceptible to these abuses, to do the healing so that you can speak your truth, so that you can feel safe enough to show up authentically in the world, to express yourself. And for all of my ladies who are stepping into their soft girl era, understand that softness requires safety. And that's to the gentlemen as well. If you want a soft woman, then you must create a safe enough environment. You arguing with her, raising your voice, not having emotional intelligence is going to pull her right out of that soft girl energy and into her masculine energy, which is a more dominating energy. It's typically a more aggressive, warlike energy. And it's not to say that our gentlemen can't also be soft. Because women, this is where it's your responsibility to create that safe space for your man to be soft with you. If you want him to feel safe enough to be sensitive, safe enough to express himself, then you have to give him that room and create that safe space. Because nobody's going to be soft with you if they don't feel safe with you. They're not going to let their guards down. They're not going to let their guards down. So you have to create that safe space for them. You are their safe haven. And once again, this is not gender specific. You should both be creating a safe space for one another. Is there going to be a time where you might have to be a little more firm, a little more authoritative, especially when it comes to the corporate world or the business world? Yes. But at home and with one another, it should be a safe space. For your children, it should be a safe space. So I'm just going to end this message off by saying you are good enough. You are worthy enough just as you are. Even when you make mistakes, you are deserving. You are doing the best that you can. And as long as you are doing the best that you can, don't worry about what anybody else has to say. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. We all have flaws, but we are all still worthy of love. Make sure that you are being compassionate with yourself. Make sure that you are holding grace for yourself. Make sure that you're being kind to yourself. And if you didn't receive that growing up from your parents, it's now time for you to parent yourself. You get to be that parent that you never had. You get to be that loving, caring, compassionate mother to yourself. And that in itself is so liberating. It doesn't need to come from outside of you. You can give that to yourself right now. Because you are nurturing your own inner child. So it's very important that you allow her to feel safe, that you allow him to feel safe, to thrive. Not to survive, to thrive. But the only way that one can do that is when they feel safe. Peace and love.